The rain hit the train window so hard that I could barely see the station sign. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and watched the blur of small houses, wet roads, and empty benches rush past. It had been 7 years since I last came to this town, but my body still remembered the turn in the tracks, the long curve before the final stop. I held my breath as the train slowed down. My fingers, tight around the strap of my bag, began to hurt. I did not loosen them. When the train stopped, I stepped onto the wet platform, my boots slipping a little on the slick tiles. The air was heavy and full of smells I had not felt in years. Damp earth, burnt wood, something sweet and familiar that I could not name. I stood still for a moment, letting the wind push my coat open, letting it remind me that I did not belong here anymore. I was back, but I was not the same. And I knew, deep inside, neither was he. I walked to the taxi stand and gave the driver the address. My voice sounded small when I said the name of the street. As we moved through the town, I looked at everything like a stranger, but each corner pulled something old from inside me. The grocery store with the broken clock that had never worked, the old cinema with its faded red letters, the tree that had once hidden a small carved heart with 2 letters inside it. My heart beat louder with each block we passed. The house appeared around a bend, looking smaller than I remembered. The paint was older, the steps more worn, but the shape of it, the sloping roof, the crooked mailbox, had not changed. I paid the driver and stepped out. My hands shook as I touched the gate. It made a soft noise, almost like a sigh. No one answered the door at first. I waited. I waited for too long. Then a young woman opened it. Her eyes were sharp, not unfriendly, but full of questions. She looked at me like she was trying to guess who I was. I said my name, and she stepped aside without a word. Inside, everything smelled like old paper and wet fabric. I saw the photos on the hallway wall. Most of them had faces I did not know, but one, near the bottom, held his smile. It was an old photo. His hair was longer, his skin smooth, and his eyes, those eyes that once looked only at me, were full of something I no longer recognized. I heard the sound of footsteps and turned. He stood there, holding a cup of tea, frozen in place. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words did not come. He looked tired, not sick or sad, just tired in a way that people get when they have lived too much and loved too little. His shirt had a stain on it. His eyes were still the same color, but there was no light in them. He nodded once, a quick, small move, then turned away. The young woman, maybe his sister or friend or something more, led me to the living room. We sat in silence for a while. I looked at the books on the shelf, the cracked lamp on the table, the thin curtains that let the gray light spill across the floor. My fingers played with the edge of my coat. I felt like I was waiting for something to begin, but maybe it had already begun the moment I stepped off that train. She brought me tea, then left the room. I did not touch the cup. He came back in slowly, as if walking on thin ice. He sat across from me and looked down at his hands. I waited for him to say something, but he did not. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city, which country? Share it in the comments. And if this story feels close to your heart, please subscribe. There is more to come, and you will not want to miss it. I remembered a time when we talked about everything: the stars, our dreams, how we would leave this town and never come back. We had been children then, but we had loved like we were old souls. And now we were older, but I felt like strangers sitting in the ruins of a house we once built together. He finally spoke, and his voice surprised me. It was deeper, slower, with none of the wild hope I remembered. He asked how I had been. I answered with simple facts: job, city, life. He nodded, then silence again. After that, he told me his parents had died, his father last year, his mother the year before. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to say I was sorry, but it sounded too small. He did not look like he wanted comfort. He looked like he had stopped needing it a long time ago. Then he said something that broke the air between us. He said, "I thought you would never come back." I looked at him and saw not the boy I had loved, but a man who had learned to live without me. A man who had built a life with hard walls and no doors. And I had come in through a broken window, uninvited by time. I told him I had thought about coming back many times, but life had pulled me away, and I had let it. He did not blame me. He only said, "It happens." I wanted to cry, not because of the words, but because of how easy they were. Like we had never mattered, like we were pages torn out and thrown away. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. The sky grew darker. The young woman passed the room, her eyes on the floor. He said he worked at the factory now. He fixed machines. It paid enough. I tried to picture him in that job, hands deep in metal, noise in his ears. I could not. I could only see the boy who wrote poems and painted stars on his ceiling. I stood up. I said I needed to walk. He said nothing, only moved aside so I could pass. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves flew across the road. I walked without knowing where I was going. My boots made soft sounds on the wet path. I passed houses, lights, voices behind windows. I walked until my legs hurt, and then I walked more. Halfway through the park, I sat on a bench and finally let the tears come. Not loud, not fast. Slow tears that carried 7 years of dreams and the weight of meeting someone I had loved so much, only to realize he was gone. Gone. But still here, and that was the hardest kind of loss. I stayed on that bench until the cold reached through my coat. My hands were numb, but I did not move. Around me, the park slowly emptied. Children's laughter faded. The last jogger passed, head down, lost in rhythm. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a pale orange glow over the path. When I finally stood up, my legs felt stiff. I walked back through the quiet streets, following a path I had walked 100 times before, but now each step felt like it belonged to someone else. A younger version of me, someone who still believed time could be kind. At his house, the windows were lit. I could hear music playing inside, soft and distant. For a second, I thought about knocking again, saying something more, asking questions I had buried for years, but I knew he would not answer them the way I needed. I turned away and walked toward the small guest house I had rented for the weekend. As I reached the corner, I looked back once. The house stood still, silent behind the lights. The boy I had loved was in there, but he was not mine anymore. The guest house was small, with one bedroom and a narrow kitchen. The walls were painted soft blue, and the curtains smelled of lavender. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down beside it. The silence in the room was thick, but it was not heavy. It felt safe, in a way his house did not. I lay down, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. I had imagined this weekend so many times. I thought it would feel like coming home. I thought there would be smiles, long conversations, maybe even tears. But none of that had happened. The person I came back for had moved on. Maybe he had changed slowly, day by day. Or maybe I had. Either way, the space between us was too wide now. That night, I did not sleep well. I turned often. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw him. The way he sat. The way he looked past me. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I had spent years holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. Now, I had to let her go. The girl I was back then. And him too. In the morning, I made coffee and stood by the window. The town was quiet, like it always had been. A boy rode past on a bicycle. A woman walked her dog. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. I decided to walk to the lake. It was a place we used to visit often. We would sit on the old dock, throw stones into the water, talk about what our lives would be like when we got older. The dock was still there, the wood dark from years of sun and rain. I sat on the edge and watched the ripples move across the surface. A man came down the path a few minutes later. He looked older than me, with tired eyes and a kind smile. He stopped near the dock and pulled a sandwich from his bag. We did not speak, but somehow his presence made the silence less sharp. After a while, he stood and walked away, and I was alone again. Sitting there, I let myself remember. I remembered the first time I met him, how he helped me pick up my books outside school, how he wore a red jacket and looked like someone from a storybook. I remembered the first time he held my hand, walking home in the rain. Our hands had been cold and wet, but I had never felt warmer. And I remembered our last summer together. We promised to write, to wait, to stay the same, but nothing ever stays the same. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked back toward town. As I passed his street, I slowed down. I told myself I would not stop, but I found my feet turning toward the house anyway. He was in the yard, working on a broken chair. He looked up, saw me, and I froze. I expected him to turn away, but instead he set down his tools and moved aside. I walked over, unsure why, unsure what I hoped to find. We sat together on the low wall near the fence. It was the same wall where we once talked about running away together. But this moment was not the same. He seemed older, tired in the way people get when life doesn't go as planned, and yet they keep going. I told him I had almost not come. I told him I was afraid to see how much had changed. I admitted that I had carried a picture of him in my mind for years, and I had not been ready to lose it. He listened quietly. I could not tell if he felt the same. He said he had written to me for months after I left, but I only replied twice. I had no excuse for that. I had been lost in a new world, swallowed by a new life, and the distance between us had grown faster than I expected. He told me about his life, how he stayed, how he tried to move forward, how his parents got sick and time passed. He had met someone after me. It had not lasted. He said he was not angry anymore, not for a long time. I told him I still wondered what might have happened if I had stayed. He did too. We both knew it would have been different, but different did not always mean better. We sat in silence. I looked at my hands. He looked at the sky. I thought about how strange it was to sit beside someone I had once loved so deeply and feel like we were strangers again. There was no tension between us, only the quiet recognition that we had belonged to another time. When I stood up to leave, he wished me well, not with words, but with the way he looked at me, the way his expression softened, even just for a second. I walked back toward the guest house, and I did not look back. That night, I packed my bag slowly. I folded each item with care, like I was closing the pages of a chapter. I opened the window before I went to bed. The air smelled of pine and smoke. I listened to the quiet sounds of the town, and I knew I would not return here again. I came back to find him. What I found instead was myself. I left early the next morning. The sun had not yet touched the tops of the trees, and the roads were still wet from the night's rain. I rolled my suitcase quietly down the steps of the guest house and closed the door behind me. There was no one to say goodbye to, and maybe that was best. Some endings do not need an audience. They only need to happen. As the taxi moved through the quiet town, I kept my eyes on the window. Familiar buildings passed by, places that once held pieces of my youth. The bookstore on the corner, the bakery with the chipped sign, the empty schoolyard. These were not mine anymore. They belonged to people who had stayed, who had built their days around the same streets, the same sounds. I had gone away, and I had become someone else. At the train station, I found a bench in the corner and sat down. My train would not arrive for another 20 minutes. Around me, the station slowly came to life. A man bought coffee from a small cart. A mother tied her child's shoelace. A teenager sat nearby, playing music too loudly through his headphones. I watched them all. I watched life move forward. I thought about what I would take from this visit. Not love, not regret, but something quieter. A sense of peace, maybe, or a small kind of truth. I had come back to see the boy I once loved, but he was not a boy anymore, and I was no longer the girl who used to write his name on the back of notebooks. He had changed, but so had I. That was the part I had not expected. I thought I would come here and be the same. I thought I could walk into the past and find it waiting for me, but time does not wait. It never does. The train arrived with a low, steady sound. I stood up, pulled my coat tighter around me, and walked toward the platform. My suitcase bumped gently behind me. I boarded without looking back. Inside, the seats were warm from the sun. I chose one by the window. As the train pulled away, the town became smaller and smaller. The trees blurred, the roads disappeared, and just like that, it was behind me. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes. My thoughts drifted to all the versions of myself I had left in different places. The girl who laughed easily, the one who waited for letters that never came, the one who believed first love would last forever. I carried them all with me, but I no longer belonged to them. Later that day, I returned to my apartment in the city. It felt different too, though nothing had changed. The same chair in the corner, the same coat on the rack, but something inside me had shifted. I was more still, more sure. Sometimes clarity comes not from answers, but from facing questions that hurt. Over the next weeks, I returned to work. I met friends for coffee. I did the shopping. I answered emails. Life resumed its shape. But now, when I passed old couples holding hands or young ones laughing on street corners, I did not feel envy. I felt understanding. Some people stay in our lives, others only pass through. But each one leaves something behind. A lesson, a feeling, a reminder of who we were and who we are becoming. One evening, I opened a box in my closet. Inside were letters, photos, small objects from years ago. I found the 2 letters he had written me that I had never answered. I read them carefully, slowly, as if they were fragile. And they were. His words were full of hope, full of belief. He had loved me deeply once, and for a time, I had loved him with the same fire. But time is a strong wind. It moves us, bends us, changes the shape of things. I placed the letters back in the box. I did not cry. Instead, I walked to the balcony and looked out over the lights of the city. I thought about him again. I wondered what he was doing, if he was happy, if he sometimes thought of me. But I did not need the answers anymore. I had gone back to a place that once held my heart. I had looked into the eyes of the past and accepted what I saw. That was enough. Not every love story ends in forever. Some end in understanding. Some end in silence. And some do not end at all. They change form. They become part of who we are. Months passed. The seasons turned. One morning, I found a postcard in my mailbox. It was unsigned. The image was of a lake surrounded by trees, the same lake where I had sat alone. There were no words on the back, only a small heart drawn in the corner. I placed it on my shelf. Later, I met someone new, not suddenly, and not with the same wild heartbeat of first love. This love grew slowly, like soft rain filling a dry well. He listened more than he spoke. He made me laugh in small ways. He did not ask me about my past, and I did not tell him everything. Some stories belong to the past, not because they are secrets, but because they are sacred. I did tell him one thing, though. I told him that once I had gone back to find someone I thought I had lost, and instead, I found myself. He smiled and held my hand, and in that moment, I knew the girl I once was had done the bravest thing. She went back, not to hold on, but to let go. The boy I loved had become a stranger, but the woman I am now is no longer afraid. Some nights, when the city was quiet and my apartment was filled with the soft hum of evening, I would sit by the window and let myself drift back. Not to feel regret, not to change anything, but to remember how it all felt. The early days, the letters, the sound of his laugh when he was still full of dreams. I realized that love, even when it does not last, still leaves light behind. It colors the way we see the world. It teaches us to feel, to hope, to grow. The pain, too, is part of the gift. It shapes us. It asks us who we are without the person we once believed would always be there. The boy I loved had been kind. He had tried. So had I. But time had asked us different questions, and we had answered them in our own ways. And now, in my own quiet life, I carried his memory like a photograph kept in a book. Not for sadness, but as proof that something once mattered deeply. And it had. It truly had. In learning to let go, I had finally